Blessings for the humble. Yesterday we had, we call it a God's Plan Day. Anybody who's engaged to be married needs to do one of the steps as an all-day retreat. And so afterwards, I'm kind of like walking around cleaning up, and there was a couple waiting for their ride. And I started talking to them. I was like, "What did you think of today?" And the guy started talking. He said, "Well, that was nice, but our problem is just communication. And I was married before, and I have 2 sons, and she's got 2 kids, and I'm talking with her, and then she gets frustrated and yells at me, and then I find myself yelling at her, and then she starts talking and saying, 'Well, here's how I feel,' and I'm watching this. I'm like, everybody's talking, and nobody's listening." And so they keep talking, and I ask my padre questions and stuff, and then the lady, she kind of just says, she said, she goes, "I feel like a burden." And he starts talking, and I kind of interrupted him, and I was like, "Hey, your fiance just said, 'I feel like a burden.' What? Is there anything you want to speak into that a little bit?" And he said, "Well, it's just been a lot, and I've been busy." And I was like, he just missed the point. Okay, so I said, "Let me try this again. You watch me. Here's a suggestion of maybe one thing you could say." And I turned to her, and I just said, "You are not a burden. You are my beloved." I don't know if he caught it. She did. But when we feel like we're talking and nobody's listening, and we feel like we just keep getting more pain and difficulty, we can feel like a burden. Like maybe I'm causing too much trouble and God stopped listening, or maybe I guess I'm not important enough for Him to pay attention to me. And we can feel like God has so many people that He listens. So many people have bigger problems than I do, and so I'm just not going to bother God with that. Or we just get tired of talking because we feel like He's not listening. But Jesus tonight reminds us that we were made for happiness. That we are not a burden to Him. We are a blessing to Him. And He desires to bless us. The blessed are those means happy. That He wants us to share in happiness, even in incredibly difficult situations. And so how do we do that? I think our invitation is to go before the Lord. To listen to our first reading talks about seek humility. That when I enter a situation or I talk to God, when I come humbly, well, then I'm in a posture of reception. That I go to listen and understand, and in order to receive. That humility, pride says, "I have it all figured out." Humility says, I don't know. I want to understand. Can you help me? I need your help, is what humility says. And God, those are like magic words. God says, "I've been waiting for you to say that." That my whole desire is to bless you and to give you what you need, what you want. Something that makes reception. So in this reception, we're invited to receive whatever it is that the Lord gives us. There was a young man I talked to, he's a student here, And he said, he's kind of an older student, and he said, my first go-around didn't go so well. Classes didn't go so well, money ran out, I just hit a wall. And I was really frustrated about that, and I felt like a failure. And so, I went home kind of ashamed, and I started working and doing what I needed to do, and now I'm back. But you know what? I needed that time. That now I'm more focused, that I get it, I'm disciplined, and I'm doing really well in my classes. And so here's a person who felt frustrated by the path that God took him on, only to now feel blessed. Our challenge is to be able to recognize that when I feel like I just hit a dead end, that when I feel like all these things are going wrong in my life, that it doesn't mean that God is gone. It doesn't mean that God has stopped listening. But instead, God is inviting me to walk on a particular path with Him in order to get somewhere better. What makes the path durable is to know that Jesus is with us, that all these things, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those who mourn, that Jesus mourned and cried over the loss of his friend Lazarus. Blessed are they who are persecuted. Blessed are you when they insult you and persecute you and utter every kind of evil against you falsely. That Jesus experienced all those things. And so when I experience them, when I experience failure and difficulty and frustration, that somehow Jesus is inviting me to show that to Him and to allow Him to come and be with me in that place. And there's a union that comes through suffering with Christ that we can't experience anywhere else. There is a difference, though. I'll be honest with you. Part of the first example I gave you with this couple is sometimes we put ourselves in situations of suffering that God does not will for us. That when we know that this isn't the relationship that's leading me to holiness, but we stay in it longer, or we're doing something else and we're like, I know I shouldn't do this, but Jesus is still trying to be with us in that. He's still trying to speak to us. But that's a suffering that, if we're honest with ourselves, we're kind of bringing on ourselves. And yet Jesus still wants to come be with us and lead us to a place that's better. There was one couple that was here yesterday, an engaged couple that I was able to spend a little more time with. And I want to tell you a little bit about them because I think it shows how God can bring great blessedness out of great difficulty. The young lady told me that she came from a very difficult family. She had been conceived through rape. And so she never knew her father. She was in foster homes as early as she could remember. Her mother died from cancer when she was 19. But when you talk to this girl, there was no bitterness. She had every reason to blame people in her life, to yell at God, why would God allow this? But she didn't. Because somehow God had reached out to her and she recognized it, that her mother, or her grandmother, was Catholic and would take her to Catholic Mass. And because her parents weren't in the picture, a lot of her other family members came and neighbors, and she's like, I had like 3 sets of parents. It was great, because she went and saw a lot of therapists and doctors. She's like, I always had a lot of skills to help cope with difficulty. She's like, somehow, and you talk to this girl, and she has an incredibly positive attitude. And she was so happy to be engaged. She's like, for a while, I didn't think I would get engaged because I just didn't know that you could be happy in marriage. But God kind of redeemed that, and now I'm so excited to be engaged, and I can't wait to be a part of my new family. Meanwhile, I said, well, it's great, and I talked to him. I said, well, tell me some of your story. And he said, well, I do have, I think, a good family, but it hasn't always been so easy. My parents, when I was young, they were both working on their careers, and so they would one would work, and then they'd hand off the kids, and the other would go to work. So they weren't really around. One of our family members had a lot of dysfunction, and so everybody was focused on that person, which kind of left me over here. And the things were bad enough that my dad turned to alcohol, and his alcoholism got so bad that he got called into work one day, and they said, unless you go to treatment for 3 months, you're fired. And he says, it was pretty bad. He said, but something happened along the way that with both of my parents in that situation, that in the midst of this situation where they could have blamed others, it's their fault, they could have felt sorry for themselves, could have cried out to God and said, why me? But instead, they did cry out to God, and they said, God, what now? What are you trying to do with this? And as they each turned to God, it began to bring them closer together. And they began to work on the difficulties in their relationship and in their family, little by little, over time, and things began to heal. So much so that he said that one day he was walking with his fiancée. They walked into the house and they turned the corner to the kitchen. And here's his parents, after 35 years, dancing in the kitchen. I've never seen my parents dance. What a beautiful image of what God wants to do is to take us from whatever situation we're in, take us by the hand, and begin to lead us. But then I want to take back control, and I want to be in charge. I want to take the lead. And so God is kind of patient, but it feels like I'm fighting God, until finally I just say, all right, Lord, I come to you poor in spirit, meaning I got nothing. I'm drained, I'm tired, I'm frustrated, I've tried everything. All right, what could it hurt? Why don't you lead me for a while? And that God wants to take us by the hand, and maybe he takes us through some turns and some twists that we weren't expecting. But he's leading us deeper and deeper into his heart that is happiness. That's God's whole plan. That every difficulty we've ever faced in life, every hardship that we feel right now, is God the Father reaching out to us, wanting to lead us, guide us through those experiences, bring his healing to where we need it, in order to take us to a place that's better. We were made for that blessedness. And when we feel the pressing in of difficulty, perhaps we can humbly turn to the Lord and say, all right, Lord, I didn't ask for this, which means this is somehow part of your plan, and I pray that you take me by the hand and lead me every step of the way until I can rejoice forever with you in heaven and rejoice with you also here on earth.